Thank you. My thanks to the Friends of Imperial College to invite and talk. And thank you, Rod, for your kind words. Just in case you're wondering what this medal is, I am the president of, as Rod said, City and Guilds College Association. We have now about 147 years old. We have about 3,500 members. And our members have gone through similar crises in the past, and they have really shaped this world. And my talk is almost a tribute to those members. And let me start the talk now. So I just want you to imagine, can you imagine Downing Street in the frantic days of February, March, April last year? Well, I can give you an insight as to what it was there. In 2010, shortly after the financial crash of 2008, I was invited to Number 10 to advise one of the most senior members of the coalition government. And this is me on the day.
That proves the point, huh?
I confess that it was rather thrilling. So my meeting, which then became a series of meetings, was with Oliver Letwin, who was the Minister of Government Policy. He was the third most ranked member of the David Cameron's coalition government. And later, I had interactions with other junior ministers like Matt Hancock and Sajid Javid. Our conversations was about sharpening up the government's ability to foresee and plan for the unexpected, to be better prepared and smarter about avoiding risks, to be constantly alert to and avoid being mugged by what are commonly called black swans. Is there anyone in Britain today who hasn't heard of black swans? Or, as Donald Trump would call, Chinese swans? Our conversations were constantly interrupted by Larry. Larry, as you know, is regarded as very important at Number 10. He's allowed to go everywhere and in the building and makes his views and presence felt. But Larry is a cat. He's a rather irritating cat. With all my meetings with Oliver Letwin, he would rub himself against my legs and occasionally give me a disapproving look. And I would reflect, Larry doesn't agree with risk assessment and crisis planning, as the cat glared at me. My thinking was this: get rid of the silo thinking. I said the government should introduce systems thinking. In managing extreme risks, there's always been too much departmental thinking. Cut across the departments, a much broader and more intelligent consideration of risk challenges emerges. This very nearly happened, but the politics of Brexit intervened. The iceberg that is COVID-19 seemed a long way away from the Titanics of government back in 2010, despite my and others' cautions. And that was very disappointing. Today, I wonder if I shouldn't have been more blunt and echoed the former Chancellor George Osborne's mantra, fix the roof while the sun is shining. but I didn't. And in any way, I suspect they wouldn't have listened to me back then. The government is always more concerned about today's news story than the future. Its preparedness for risks remain hopeful than prudent. And my role in all this is that I have spent a life in risk management. I am regarded as having an expertise in this long experience field for over 30 years. My proudest day, apart from the achievements of my 3 children, was when I was asked to become Professor of Practice Risk Management at Imperial College London. This was at my old department, like Rod, and as you know, arguably the best such department in the world. I started as a chartered civil engineer. I did a 5-year stint of apprenticeship at McDonald, an organization over a century old. It was a wonderful place to learn about engineering. Engineers learn about risk the hard way. If they get things wrong, buildings and bridges fall down and people die. About a year ago, Radio 4 had a program on the achievements of George and Robert Stephenson, the Victorian engineers, fathers of railway, were being discussed. An interviewer asked, how important were engineers seen back then? Engineers were revered in the 1880s, we were told. They had great influence. Men like Brunel, Bazalgette, Watt. It is interesting that of the UK Prime Ministers since 1721, only 5 graduated in anything scientific. Gladstone and Marquis of Salisbury studied mathematics. Baldwin and Chamberlain did metallurgy. Alone, Margaret Thatcher read chemistry. She was our only real scientific PM for 300 years. Incidentally, I heard that Angela Merkel is a physicist by education. But no engineers, no scientists, not one. What a great shame. Because engineers and scientists are good at risk assessment. That is what they spend most of their life doing. And that's what the recently late and certainly great Jack Welch, chairman and CEO of General Electric in 1980s, believed. He graduated and did his PhD in chemical engineering. And he said, I quote, engineering is one of the best backgrounds for a business career. There are no formulaic questions to most business problems. The same is true of engineering. So a third of me is an engineer. A third of me is a banker at Schroders Cazenove, an institution which is 237 years old today, where risk assessment is vital. And a third of me is a teacher and a researcher at Imperial College. Risk, engineering, investment, teaching, these are my greatest loves after my family. The benefits and the risks of globalizations have been brought to life and death by the coronavirus pandemic. Years ago, I produced a book called What's the Small Idea? In it, I argued that big drive for innovation was the key to our national prosperity. Innovation starts in small places, usually with individuals and small businesses. But innovation, by definition, takes one into the unknown, and that's risky. Innovation is found in small lakes where black swans swim. I talk about small ideas because one of the things this government consistently exaggerates is the power of big centralized government. I believe exactly the opposite is needed. Decentralization and the license to think small. In trying to solve any problem, you need to break down into smaller components and take small steps. This is better than attempting great, audacious problem-solving leaps. In computer science, a divide and conquer algorithm strategy works like this. By recursively breaking down a problem into two or more subproblems and the same related type until the problem becomes simple enough to be solved directly. So what has changed as a result of my initiative at number 10? First, some good news. The most satisfying thing about my spell at number 10 is that a few things did change to good effect. Number one, each government department now has a lead non-executive director responsible for interrogating black swan risks. Number two, investment has been made to horizon planning, thinking about tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, not just today. These are made up of academics, people from the industry, wise men and women. Number three, initiation of 3 lines of defense for risk frameworks in major infrastructure projects. The Treasury now insists on a documented risk framework encompassing 3 lines of defense. The real key in shifting from takeaway from how do we react to how would we react if the unthinkable happened, and what's missing in our toolkit for such an eventuality. Interestingly, Oliver Letwin has just written a book called Apocalypse How, set in 2037. Its thesis is that our increasing reliance on integrated digital technology may be leading us to ultimately every country in the world in the direction of a catastrophe. We are getting so integrated that when systems fail, everything in our lives fail. Diverse cars, Wi-Fi, phone systems, utilities, emergency services, media, everything blacks out. It's a dystopian vision. As I read his book, I was rather flattered to find so much of our conversation at Downing Street had found their way into his book. But there is the bad news. All that listening, all that nodding, all that is what is in his book, that he's got it, that he understood the importance of being ready. But then nothing happened as it should have done, especially in investing critical issues like crisis planning. So what about the story about black swans? Where did this strange breed come from? The black swan was created by the 2nd century Roman poet Juvenal, signifying something that doesn't exist, that can't exist. Black Swan was widely used in 16th century London as a statement of impossibility. But in 1697, the Dutch explorers saw black swans in Western Australia, and the impossible became a reality. More recently, the academic and futures and options trader, author Nassim Taleb wrote a book called Black Swan, The Impact of Highly Improbable. In a fast-moving world, we have come to believe that our advanced technology has given us so much control over our destination, that our social media has given us so much information, opinions, news at such breakneck speed that this makes us omnipotent. We are constantly told that knowledge is power, but it isn't. We never know enough. Even the smartest get it wrong. So a black swan is something you don't know because of three reasons. One, it occurs outside projected expectations. Two, it carries an unexpected impact, extreme impact. Number three, it seems only explainable after the fact. A black swan could manifest like this. And it actually happened to a friend of mine. He took a great sounding C-suite job involving moving from UK to Tokyo. This was at a considerable disruption to his family. On the day he arrived in Tokyo, a major earthquake happened in northern Japan. There, a nuclear reactor was flooded by seawater. The waves produced by this particular earthquake were so large that the sea barriers at the reactor proved 8 meters too short to stop the resulting tsunami. The damage was substantial, and this created a mini recession in Japan with remediation costs of 250 billion. He was made redundant and returned to the UK at great personal cost. Could he have predicted this? No, it was a black swan, an extreme event, an unforeseen event, but on reflection, an event that should have been foreseen and was foreseen by the few engineers and ignored by the managers at the Fukushima power plant. Big companies spend a lot of money trying to identify black swans, but this expertise is not widely available to individuals or small businesses or governments. In future, we shall increasingly need to assess how much we must invest to mitigate risk of something bad happening. Be they be floods, earthquakes, invasion of war, a global collapse of the internet, a worse pandemic, and so on. Apparently, all risk analysis done 2 years ago at the Davos Economic Review thought that the pandemic would potentially have a high impact, but a relatively low likelihood of its happening. They simply forgot an important component: velocity. When something bad happens, it behaves like a tsunami. It gets bigger, worse, and accelerates very quickly. One way to help to avoid black swans is to widen our research and consult people outside your industry network. This helps to reduce groupthink, get fresh ideas, understand the potential risks you face. I must stress, coming to Imperial, the importance of modeling, stress testing, and scenario testing. A good model is as good as the quality of data which is feeding into it. Otherwise, it's garbage in and garbage out. Good models need to be independently validated and continuously recalibrated. Whilst the model can give some guidance, sole reliance on it can be equally dangerous. Ultimately, in my opinion, there is nothing to beat experience, knowledge from other diverse industry. Black swans are always bad luck, or often bad luck. You can't beat bad luck, but you can shorten the odds. Consider the coronavirus issue. The government was juggling. It was trying to protect the NHS to cope, to safeguard the lives of the fit and the well, to save the elderly and less fit from untimely death, to keep the economy ticking and capable of being restarted. And finally, it was trying to sustain and trust on confidence in central government. It got some things right, but it did not grasp the importance of velocity and failed to prepare adequately. In 2007, during the financial crash, black swans were rare. Now they are everywhere. Black swans are not a reality. They are becoming commonplace. There are flocks of wretches wherever you look. The plagues of locusts in East Africa, the bushfires of the size of UK in Australia, floods, a month of normal rainfall in a day now in commonplace in parts of UK, earthquakes in Japan, Turkey, volcanoes in New Zealand, and of course, catastrophes like the Grenfell Tower fire. I'm a little bit close to that particular black swan event. I was asked by the Secretary of State to be one of the industry experts to assist the government on how to change the culture to support greater building safety following the tragic Grenfell fire. We had to implement recommendations from Dame Judith Hackett, independent review of building regulations and fire safety in 2018. How could you forget this? 12 of us, made up from different industries, met every 2 months since 2018 under the chairmanship of Dame Judith Hackett, with a remit to two. One, hold account the industry players responsible for driving the specific changes of the building safety program. Two, accelerate the industry culture to change and prevent a disaster like Grenfell never happen again. Dame Judith's 159-page review pulled no punches and concluded the current system of building regulations and fire safety is not fit for purpose. The system failure identified in the report has allowed to perpetuate a culture of indifference. A culture of indifference is pretty damning. The increasing need to rigorous scrutiny of number of our sectors in their processes and their attitude towards risk has been deemed urgent. Perhaps some of my urgings and pressure has helped this to happen. Recently, I have been asked by Dame Judith to examine the relationship between the insurance industry and the construction industry, which many believe is broken. I am doing this as an external expert working with guidance from the ministry team. This world of risk is getting hot. Why are you doing this? This is a big question I was frequently asked. For instance, Lord Lilly, previously Secretary of State of Margaret Thatcher's government, and now an active minister at the House of Lords, quizzed me as to why I was doing this. Why are you persecuting your lonely clothes or trying to get these busy politicians and cabinet ministers to turn their attention towards thinking the unthinkable? There are 4 reasons. Because I believe it really matters, especially in fast-moving world. 2, because I believe being intelligent and circumspect and calm, we can avoid expensive tragic events. 3, because I passionately believe that short-termism culture of this government must change. Politicians towards managing risks is woeful. And 4, but very importantly, the last, because I believe that we can tame black swans. So, my advice as an advisor, professor, thinker, banker, whatever category you put in, I like to conclude with 7 pieces of advice that I urge you individually to think about. Rule number 1, think small. Think in manageable chunks. Remember those computer engineers who take small steps in solving big problems. Think small can lead to big solutions. Rule number 2, think velocity. As we are in a fast-moving, integrated world, and it's getting faster. If we can't keep up with speed, we shall fail. Rule number 3, think about resilience. Are you tough and calm in a crisis? Do you panic? In another book by Nassim Taleb called Anti-Fragile, Things That Gain from Disorder, and he reflects on the human bones getting stronger when you're subjected to stresses and tension. Similarly, many things in life benefit from stress and volatility and turmoil. Anti-Fragile is a resilience lifted to a new level. Anti-Fragile describes things that not only gain from chaos, but gain immunity when exposed to change. Rule number 4, think radical. People are prone to thinking about normal. In a crisis, they always say, when things get back to normal. In my humble opinion, normal is history. And you can't turn the clock back. You must go forward. Radical is the new normal. An example of this, the speed of construction of the Nightingale Hospital, the Excel Center, the speed of the vaccinations which came into life here in the UK. Not normal, just radical. Rule number 5, think failure. When I was young, a friend of mine deliberately broke toys and he pulled them apart to see how they worked. We test cars by crashing them. We constantly run pressure tests to see how financial systems will survive or fail after the financial crash. Thinking about the failure is about thinking about consequences. Rule number 6, think individual, then local, then national, then global. Build your thinking from bottom up. Think about the big picture thinking about the big picture and globalization lead us away from the most important thing of all, people. And my last advice is rule number 7, think people. Put people first, not processes. If you think about people first, I believe you'll be on course to help to create a better, stronger, and a happier world. Thank you. And if you have any questions, please do ask them. I will take the risk that I can manage to answer them. Thank you again.
Thank you, Atula. Thank you very much indeed. Fascinating. A couple of people have put comments up. I'd like, are there any of our audience, our members here, who have experience of Black Swan events that they might like to contribute to how they arose and how they solved them? It seems to me with Grenfell, with a tsunami in Japan, that there were probably a small group of people already had estimated that there could be a disaster. It was certainly so in Grenfell. The problem seems to me that the people in power did not believe that there could be a problem. So the philosophy of quite what a black swan is seems to me to be open for discussion. I'm very interested if people have a contribution there. Anybody like to switch themselves on and speak? Oh, there you are.
I'm happy, Rod.
Yes. Well, you have some experience. Yes, please do.
Well,
John.
there's a lot of resonances there, and I'll start on an unusual place. September the 11th, 2001, I was working in a subsidiary of Halliburton. And as I saw the towers collapse, I realized that whoever did this was a civil engineer, because it was essentially just a replay of Piper Alpha. You heat steel up, it loses strength, the building comes down. Yes. That size. And of course, Osama bin Laden was an engineer. Halliburton itself was responsible for, well, maybe had a part to play in another Black Swan event where the Macondo oil release was supposed to have 21 concrete collars in the outer annulus, and Halliburton had allegedly fitted 6. So that leads us on to the Grenfell experience, which is my big experience as a physicist working in engineering, is that the last point you made, Atula, about people is critical, and the issue is of courage in the science. So if you have a composite lining which you believe is combustible and which has not been tested, then you have to say that.
Yes.
You have to let someone else take the responsibility, because in a project, what happens is that the project manager will get to all the difficult questions and hide them within the individual discipline engineers. So what the strategy would be is, okay, let the engineer take responsibility for the cladding. Well, when I came to my insurance company in 2015, we had a summer of cladding fires in the Middle East, which were the subject of presentations by the civil engineers. So all of those things within an engineered society, which is what we are, we always have barriers between us and danger.
Yes.
Some of the dangers are man-made, as with the internet. Some of them, as with fertilizer, which again is an explosive if it's in the wrong hands.
Yeah.
My big experience in insurance the past couple of years is that people still will say, well, it's only dangerous if. And there's so many examples of what happens. I mean, we cover the world in insurance, so wherever it is, we're paying. So people who make the decision based on, oh, I'm here in my port and it's not Beirut, or I'm here, there and everywhere, and it'll happen to someone else.
Yeah.
But it does happen, and it happens because people know the rules and they break them.
Yeah.
And just to finish on that, Guy Vince's book on transcendence, which is about the cultural evolution of the human race, is so on point, where she says, well, don't think of evolution as necessarily getting better. If you get people who pressure people to forget the rules, we'll go backwards. And of course, she wrote it thinking of Donald Trump, but it's applicable to all areas of business. So thank you very much for letting me interject.
Yeah.
Would you like to comment on that, Atula? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Grenfell was a good example where the whole industry's culture, the kind of the building industry and the wider industry, it's a very big industry, was very much like, well, you know, it's fine to if there's a fire risk, you know, we will sign the piece of paper and, you know, we don't have to tell anybody. It's a kind of the whole ethos of culture. What reminded me a lot about the financial services sector was very much, you know, the bonus, very much kind of like, you know, I look after myself and, you know, I'm sure I'll be gone by the time the crisis happens, because I would have banked my bonus and you know, I'm in a different place kind of thing. But the financial services really took the trouble to really understand what are those cultural issues which we need to put in place in a large organization. How can we make the senior management accountable for these failures? And a similar cultural evolution is happening in the building industry, but it's a long process. It's not going to happen overnight.
Thank you. Bill Blackburn. Are you there, Bill? Made on the chat here.
Hello, Rod.
Hi.
Shall
you
I
made a comment about risk listing.
Risk listing. So my kind of comment and perspective is that too often I see in organizations that there's something that may be called a risk register. There are people who think they're doing risk management, but too often it just looks like people are taking comfort out of listing a set of risks rather than doing anything to manage those risks so that the likelihood of them occurring or the impact if they do occur is reduced. So I think be interested in your kind of perspective on that and how we can get people to manage risks rather than just list them and hope they go away.
Well, I was going to draw in Helen Natras, who commented about experience on her own construction sites. Are you there, Helen?
Yes, I am. Yeah, risk management has been a big thread through the whole of my professional career, right? And I'm a you know, dyed to the bone civil engineering contractors person. And I know exactly what Bill means when he's talking about listing. I just despair sometimes when I see. I mean, sometimes they're not even risks; they're just like lists of hazards. They don't even say what the risk is. But a big issue, going on a little bit from that, in my own professional experience, we've always had columns for the hazard, and then what is the risk, and you have to rate the risk, and then what is the mitigation, and what is the risk after the mitigation, and what are the things that you have to do to monitor that the mitigation has been effective. I mean, that's just like normal for me, but I'm guessing for politicians it's not. But in another thread of my life, I've been very involved with the British Tunnelling Society because that was what I used to do. I'm retired now, right? So I used to build tunnels, big major projects, Channel Tunnel, Jubilee Line, all that sort of thing. And the big issue with insurers came up with respect to things, a number of very large tunnel disasters, particularly places like the Storebelt where they had that enormous inundation. And the issue of competence came up. And Atula was talking about people. Well, there are people in the equation that can be affected, but there are people who are actually responsible for managing risk, and competence is a really big issue. And the British Tunnelling Society joined forces with the insurance industry to make a code of practice to define a set of a sort of a what would I call it, like a framework for defining competence and experience for people who were capable of identifying and managing risks. And you know, if we had some people like that in the senior positions that Atula is talking about, people who were actually competent at looking at risk, it might go somewhere towards addressing this black swan situation.
Thank you, Helen. You're quite right. I noticed that Alan Gilbertson here has commented that we're dealing with human nature, aren't we? It seems to me we're also having a talk about why engineers and scientists aren't politicians, and why politicians aren't scientists and engineers.
I have actually considered that at times, but I'm not one for towing the party line. I'd be thrown out. I speak my mind, right? Straight down the line. And,
well, you might be dealing with facts as well. Atula, do you want to comment on that?
Just one thing on Helen's point. There's one EEE electrical engineer in the House of Commons who's from Imperial. That's an only known engineer I know, but there are ex-army engineers there, but one known. But Helen, I totally agree with you on competence. I really think one of the things the financial services sector, and I'm personally responsible for training over 1,000 risk officers, they realized that this whole profession called risk managers, or risk officers, or whatever title you give, was pretty weak. And they were pretty much always kind of overruled by senior management because they were weak. Now it's 12 years after the crisis, they have board positions now. They actually, and when something goes wrong, and you probably hear the Credit Suisse, First Boston just fired the risk person, right? And they carry so much risk, so much responsibility to make sure that the highest level, the risks are managed. That whole culture doesn't exist in other industries. Definitely does not anywhere exist in government. Government loves their risk registers. They have pages and pages of risk registers. And the more they have put in the risk register, the better it is, it's considered to be good. None of them consider this concept of velocity. One department I know, I have worked with them, and they have introduced this concept of, what if one of these things manifests very quickly? Are we ready for that? The whole issue of preparedness and all that is still in very infant stages. So I totally agree with Helen and the comments made by Bill before that.
Can I just add to that? There was an interesting example of where a new risk got added by the Home Office into the strategic threat assessment, and that was, I think, back in around 2013. And the risk of volcanic activity had never been on the threat assessment until the volcano blew up in Iceland. Yeah. And what have we done about it since?
And I see Brian Hogan has asked, is any thought and planning on how we deal with the Carrington effect, the massive solar flare, let alone meteorites? These are extraordinary events.
Yeah.
And they would require an international response. Yeah. Is there a group of the United Nations, Atula?
There are international bodies which looks at risk management, but very patchy. It's very much given to the national governments to do. So, for example, CDC was, the pandemic. There are some kind of bodies like that which actually shares information, and but purely on risk management is such a infant profession, if that's the right word. This concept of risk management has not been developed. The only area I know is kind of some industries have got it to some level, but most industries, the ones who's gone through a lot of turmoil, like chemical industry, has got a good hazard, anything which has got hazard, financial, which has gone through a major crash, has brought it up to a certain level. But some industries is in a really infant stage. And partly it's lack of people, as Helen said. You just haven't got the right people to lead that.
Right. Andrew Larkin, are you there? You would like to make some
Yes.
comments?
Yes, so I'm involved in looking at electricity grid reliability, particularly looking at some potential future black swan situations. But one of the things I wanted to do was sing the praise of a small disaster. There's nothing like having a small incident that is quite serious but not too bad to grab people's attention. So in my personal life, as an engineer, a few years ago, I had a member of staff taken to hospital, very nearly losing an eye as a result of an accident at work. That made me sit up and think. And fortunately, within my work currently on the UK electricity grid, in 2019, there was an incident where a lightning strike on the electricity grid caused a generator to trip offline, that caused another generator to trip offline, that caused another generator to trip offline. And we were relatively close to the whole country going dark as a result of it. As it was, they had to send out engineers to restart 20 or so trains and all sorts of other things. That has been brilliant for the work that I'm doing at the moment, because I'm trying to look at what's going to go wrong with the electricity grid in 10 or 15 years' time. And the fact that we came close to a problem in the UK has actually been a real benefit. So one of the things I would encourage everybody to do who's involved in this sort of situation is try and find their own example of a very close call where there was something that was very nearly a disaster, and make sure that everybody is as aware of that as possible, because it overcomes that thing of human nature that life is actually nice and cozy and relatively safe.
Yeah.
That sounds like you want adjunct provocateurs to go
Well,
and blow up bridges and blame the enemy.
So I have a problem at the moment where I'm aware of a failure mechanism that I'm trying to find the right way of communicating it. And I'm currently thinking about how I can blow up part of the electricity grid to demonstrate this effect. And actually have some nice film of something bursting into flames, but try and do that in a way that it's not on the national grid where it's going to affect too many people. But it's such a frustrating situation. I have reported this concern to lots of different arms of government, parts of the security services, grid operators, and so on. And because it's a theoretical problem only written down on a bit of paper, no one seems willing to listen to me. So I'm trying to think how I can blow something up and make some smoke and then get some attention.
Well, Mike Griffiths, I see on the chat line, has said, how do you get politicians to worry about Black Swan events?
Yeah.
There aren't likely to be any votes in sorting things out. Voters aren't worried about these things.
Can I just respond to that one?
Please.
One of the things we are working with this current government is to create an independent body which looks at what sort of things which Andrew was talking about. So they would scan the horizon, so to speak, and so the best example I can give you is that for the Bank of England to be independent. They have a monetary policy committee, which is an independent group of people, is not some of them not financial background, advise the bank how they should operate. So they're thinking about something similar in government to form to do that. But I don't know, Carrie, whether it'll ever, Andrew, sorry, I don't know, Andrew, whether it'll ever materialize. But this is one of the ideas we are trying to introduce into government, to sort of collect an independent group, could be professors from Imperial, from industry people, who actually sit outside and critique the government things. And we could send our black swans to them, but it's early stage.
Yeah, when I made the comment just now that politicians and engineers are entirely different people, I hadn't read down my list of chats to see that Zoltan had made exactly that comment there. So I apologize for stepping in there. Do you want to make any comment about the difference in mindset, and is it possible? Do you think, for example, after this pandemic, where the government has been really dependent upon the advice of scientists, do you think it's made any change? I noticed Mike Goodfellow is on the line. He has a lot of experience in talking to government. I don't know whether he would like to join the debate. You need to unmute if you're coming in, Mike.
Yes, I've got that. Yeah. Yes, it's a long time since I was working directly with government. But these are topics where it's hard to grab attention and budget to get things fixed. And I think there is a danger of finding that if you identify all the black swans, they become simply unaffordable to mitigate. And I think politicians know that.
Okay. Are you happy with that answer, Zoltan?
Yeah, well, I just believe that it is kind of a conflict of interest. So scientists and engineers are very likely to look for, long-term impacts, like, invention, something, to build something long-term to last, while maybe on the political sphere, there may be, more focus on shorter-term, rewards or fixes, short-term fixes.
But just to come back, what we do know is that governments are very unwilling to invest in preparedness, and we've seen that in the current crisis with PPE, etc.
Yeah, we'll deal with it when it comes through the front door.
Ultimately, yes.
I see Brian Hogan has put up a note that there's an alumnus who read electrical engineering. I'm sure I have difficulty pronouncing the name. Chionawara, is that? Now MP, Shadow Minister for Science.
Yeah.
Might make a good guest speaker at Friends event. He says he's seen her speak on technical subjects at Imperial before, and she's very good. Well, there we are. We ought to, as Chair Emeritus, it's not my privilege to be planning next year, but perhaps David might be able to pick that up.
I know Chi. I know her, so it's entirely possible. She's a good speaker. She's also a politician, but nobody's perfect. I wanted to intervene anyhow. I don't know if anyone remembers a politician called David Cameron. I see some of you do. Back in 2012 or 2011, he was the Prime Minister, and he was given a report actually indicating the mess that the Carrington event, a Carrington type event, would make of the Olympics communication. We were due to have the Olympics in 2012, if you remember. And there was a report from the Royal Academy of Engineering around that time. And space weather, that is, things like the Carrington event, suddenly appeared on the National Risk Register, and I can assure you is getting far more attention and far more thought about mitigation than it was before David Cameron had that report. So once in a while you can frighten a politician into moving them the right way. But it's the problem that Andrew Larkin was saying. You've got to have a specific example that they fear happening. And then if you offer them mitigation procedures, sometimes they will pick them up and start paying attention. So I don't think politicians are always wrong, just most of the time.
Well, thank you very much for that intervention, David. Atula, back to you. Would you like to wind up? Unless there are other people who want to add to this discussion at this time, perhaps you could say a few closing words.
I just want to say that privileged to come and talk to you. I think you are going to hear more black swans. The next black swan, you will not have a guess what it is, because it's by its very nature, it will be a surprise. So you won't have appear on a risk register somewhere, and then you would have said, "Oh, that's what really, that's I told you so," kind of thing. But if we don't put structures in place and get people trained up to that's what Helen was talking about, we will be in the same position at the next black swan. I'll be giving another talk to you in 3 years about another black swan. But I think I kind of agree and not agree with Zoltan on this one, Zoltan. And I think partly most of the politicians have got PPE, the politics, philosophy, and economics from Oxford. That's their default thing to get into government. And I don't think that really educate them as to manage risks, really. They just sometimes do not get it.
I think you ought to be giving some lectures at the PPE course at Oxford, Atula. That would help, I think.
And I think that's where we stand. So I'm a bit hopeful, but not too much.
Well, thank you. And perhaps I could call upon our president, our chairman, David Southwood, to give a thank you from us.
Well, yes, thank you, Rod, for a start, for organizing this, and even more thanks to Atula for an absolutely stimulating session. I always remember that Bertrand Russell said, most people would die rather than think. In fact, most people do. But here, it's not just thinking, it's thinking the unthinkable. And I think that is a lesson I will take home from this. I thought the discussion was highly enlightening, and really, it's been a fascinating fireside talk. And now I'm worrying about the risk assessment of the fire that's behind me. There you are. Thank you very much, Atula. And I guess those of us who are unmuted can show our appreciation in a traditional manner.
Thank you very much. Really good.
Thank you.
Okay, if I can finally close the activity, reminding you that the next Friends event for everybody is a trip to White City for chemistry, but not just for chemists, in the, I think it's the Innovation Labs there. Sounds very exciting. And then finally, my usual message at the end. Do remember that it does cost us a small amount of money to keep this show on the road. And so please feel able to make a contribution on the donation, using the donation button on our site. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you at our next event. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.